finish up one thing from last week's parsha. We didn't do the Aseret Adibros, so there are a few points here we want to get from the Aseret Adibros. The first thing is like this. Take a look at page 404. So the Torah says like this, a very interesting idea here. It says like this, page 404, it's Pasuk 17. And it says like this, Vayotze Moshe, it's right in the middle of the page. Here, join us here at the table. Vayotze Moshe es ha'am likras Elokim. You see that verse 17, it's about 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Vayotze Moshe es ha'am likras Elokim min ha'machane, vayisyatzvu betachti sohar. They camped underneath the mountain. It literally, it means at the foot of the mountain. Literally means at the foot of the mountain. But there's a very famous Gemara over here in Shabbos on page 88 in Shabbos, page Peches, that Vayisyatsu betachti sahar, that says that Hashem held the mountain over the Jewish people like a barrel. He dangled the mountain over their heads like a barrel. Anybody remember the continuation of that saying? It said, if you accept the Torah, very good. Im tekablena mutav, if you accept the Torah, very good. V'im lav, if not, sham teik v'rasa, and that's where you're going to be buried. That's what the Gemara says. The Jewish people said, nasa v'nishma. Nasa v'nishma, we are so nasa v'nishma. Okay? So that's what the Gemara says. Now, there are several interesting questions about that Gemara. You see, what the Gemara is, first of all, every line, if you've learned Gemara, every word of Gemara is very precise. Every word of Gemara is very precise. And every analogy used in the Talmud, Talmud took 30 years to write, another 30 years that was just a rough draft. Another 30 years for the final draft of the Talmud by a team of scholars. It took longer even than the Art Scroll project, even longer than the Schottenstein project. Right? So it's a very, very big question over here. It says, God dangled the mountain over them. It said, do you want the Torah? Yes or no? Well, most people in the world, if you dangled a mountain over them, would probably be agreeable to whatever you're proposing. So before anything else, let's understand the Maharal. The Maharal is one of the great mystical commentaries. Maharal says that what the Gemara is trying to tell you is that the choice of accepting Torah, not that they actually had a choice, but that the choice of accepting Torah was so obvious that it was as if you had a mountain dangled over your head. That's how obvious it was that you should accept the Torah. That's on a symbolic level. Yishai, join us. That's on a symbolic level. The choice was so blatantly obvious that it was as if you had a mountain dangled over your head. That's what the Maharal says. Hold all the questions for a few minutes. That's what the Maharal says. That's idea number one. So that's certainly one of the meanings over here. Now, there's another idea that's contained here, which is as follows. You realize the Jewish people saw something no one in history ever saw? No one in history ever saw. Let's take the Gemara literally for a second. No mountain climber who's climbed Everest and possibly fallen off, but no mountain climber who's ever climbed Everest or K2 or any of these other places where mountain climbers go, no mountain climber has ever seen the underside of a mountain. Think about that. They've gone up, they've seen ice packs, they've seen avalanches, they've seen bodies of people who didn't see the avalanches. They've seen lots of things on the mountains. Some guy just found gold on a mountain. He found a treasure on a mountain from where a plane crashed. There was an Indian plane that crashed years ago. Some guy was climbing and he found it. Now he's got claims with the government about who the money goes to. Which I don't understand why the guy even told anybody. It's not like anybody knows what he's finding up on the mountain. I would have just brought it home, put it in a Swiss bank. I don't know what he started trouble for. So he's got who does it belong to from an Indian plane crash and so on. According to Allah, it's clearly his. According to Allah, it's clearly his because it's Yush and somebody's given up hope on it. Okay, be that as it may. No one has ever seen the underside of a mountain. Okay, now let's just imagine for a second that we are the Jewish people. Okay, now. Take a look up, and you look and see this thing hanging over your head. And, Bernie asks me, what is that thing? Never seen a shape like that before. I've never seen that kind of imprint. I said, well, Bernie, nothing to worry about. There's just a mountain dangling in the midair over our heads. Says, hey, Bernie, you want to accept the Torah? Nasa v'nishma. Oh, yeah, I am so nasa v'nishma. There's a mountain, my favorite thing, nasa v'nishma, that and flossing. You know, that's just my favorite thing. You know, nasa v'nishma, oh, you are definitely going to say nasa v'nishma. You know there's a mountain dangling over you. Okay, so now I want to ask you a question. Let's put this in perspective because we're going to analyze that Gemara a little bit. Imagine you're home and your brother comes running into the house in a cold sweat, panting, and he slams the front door. And you say to him, what's wrong, Jeff? Right? What's wrong? And your brother says to you, I was walking on the street, I was being chased by a poodle. It was like a Doberman. I thought to me it was like a Doberman. All right? So then I understand, okay, that he saw a poodle. He was scared out of his wits that it was like a Doberman. I mean, the real puppy in the story is obviously your brother, but he saw a poodle. He thought to him it was like a Doberman. Okay, so he's using an analogy to explain to you what his level of fear was. But can you imagine your brother running into the house and he's in a cold sweat and he says, yeah, I saw a Doberman, you know, to me it seemed like a poodle, you know, and I just ran for my life, you know. Well, if it was me, I would just say I saw a Doberman and it seemed very much like a Doberman. I don't need any analogies over there. I don't need an analogy. I understand so if it's a poodle and your brother is deathly afraid of poodles, you know, the poodles is your brother's green kryptonite, like Superman, you know, it's just something about poodles gets him, reminds him of his 4th grade English teacher. You know, so he's just terrified of poodles. Okay, that I understand. But to go to an analogy and tell me it was a Doberman, but it was like a poodle, right, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you're afraid of a Doberman, I would just say it was a Doberman, looked like a Doberman. So if you look at the Gemara says, well, God dangled a mountain over them like a barrel. And what I'm saying, he looked up and say, hey, Bernie, what is that? I don't know. Looks like a mountain to me. Big deal. Uh-oh, it's a barrel. And that doesn't make any sense. So if you would say God dangled a barrel over them like a mountain, that I understand. My goodness, look at that barrel. Boy, that thing is just like a mountain. That I understand. But the Gemara does just the opposite. The Gemara says God dangled a mountain over them like a barrel. What sense does that make? Well, what does that mean? I don't need an analogy. If I was writing the Gemara, I would have written God dangled a mountain over them like a mountain. Well, that's enough. I don't need any analogies. That was just like a barrel. The barrel's a poodle in this case. You understand the problem. Problem number one of the Gemara. Problem number two, if you look in the wording of the Gemara says that God said to the Jewish people, if you accept the Torah, very good. And if not, sham tehei kfuraschem. What does the word sham mean in Hebrew? There. What should the Gemara have said? Here. How do you say here in Hebrew? Po. Right? Po tehei kfuraschem. Why is the Gemara? That's where you're going to be buried? Why that's where you're going to be buried? It should say, here is where you're going to be. Not that's where you're going to be buried. Here. If I drop a mountain on you, it's right here. Maybe that's where you're going to go splat. You know, some of it will go out over there. But here is where you're going to be buried. Why does the Gemara switch it to there? Okay?
Was it to the Jewish nation?
What's that? Speaking to the Jewish nation. They're all under the mountain.
Okay. No, as in when he says this is where it's going to end, as in this is where your story's going to end now.
Right, so you should say Po. Why does it say there? Why does it say there? Why doesn't it say here?
Because you didn't even get to Matthew Torah. You didn't even
say wait, but here they're standing under the mountain. Right here, I'm dropping the mountain. And if I'm about to crush a fly on the table, and I'm going to say, okay, you better fly away, otherwise there is where you're going to be buried. I would just go, here is where you're going to be buried.
I accept that, but look how close you were to actually receiving it. That's what it's saying here. As in, this is how close you were, and that's, you know, and if it would have said here, it would have been insinuated that we actually got the Torah.
Okay, maybe, I hear, maybe. What do you say, B'Yamin, very quickly?
Could it be that he's still referring to Egypt?
Okay, possibly. Interesting. Could be. Okay, so let me tell you what one of the approaches here is, because this is a little broader. If you take a barrel, let's say you have a barrel, you're holding an inverted barrel over me. Right? That's what the analogy a barrel seems to be. Otherwise, I don't need an analogy. If I took an inverted barrel and I lowered a barrel down over you, so what would happen? So on the one hand, you'd be trapped inside the barrel, right? On the other hand, depending on how hermetically sealed the barrel is, nothing would be able to get into the barrel to get to you. Okay? So God takes a mountain, and it looks like a barrel. The only way the mountain looks like a barrel, the only thing I need an analogy for is to let me know that the mountain is hollowed out inside like a barrel. The mountain is hollowed out. I'm going to lower a hollowed out mountain over you. Now, what's going to happen? You're going to be trapped within the mountain, right? You got the walls of the mountain, it's hollowed out. You won't be crushed, but you'll be inside the walls of the mountain. Many people see the Torah as the walls of a mountain because we are trapped inside the restrictions of the Torah. Everywhere you look, there is another don't lurking. Don't eat pork. Don't look at the wrong things. Don't let your ego run away with you. Don't wear shotness. Don't speak lashon. There's always a don't waiting for you. There's something that's forbidden. There's something the Southern hanging judges would have a great time with Torah. Don't touched his shoes, hang him. You forgot the bench, hang him. They'd have a great time. So the Torah has always got these don'ts are just lurking. It's all these restrictions. Okay, the only thing is that we forget that if you'd be inside this protective mountain, maybe you can't get out past those walls of the mountain. But then again, nothing can get into you. So what God is really telling the Jewish people is, look, the Torah from an outside look looks intimidating. Got all these restrictions and limitations, and you have to behave with self-control, all of which runs against the grain of the modern society. What God's telling the Jewish people is, im tekablena, if you accept the Torah, mutav, good. That's the best thing you could do for yourself. To get within the walls of Torah is the best thing you could do for yourself in order to live life in this world. Forget about the world to come. That's the cream on the top of the cake. Forget about the world to come. You want to enjoy this world? The best thing you can do for yourself is get within the protective walls and devices of Torah. Im lav, if you don't accept the Torah, sham tehik faraschem. Your burial will be over there. Where's there? You want to leave the walls of the Torah and join the real world, that world will bury you. You'll be buried under a pile of desire. You'll be buried under a pile of vulgarity. You'll be buried under a pile of families crumbling. You'll be buried under whatever the entire world is buried under today. That will bury you. Now, I'm giving you a choice. I'm not looking to crush you. I'm giving you a choice. I'm telling you, you could choose Torah. That's what God's saying to the Jewish people. Choose Torah with all the restrictions that I'm giving you. And the illusion is that the restrictions are going to be an imposition on your life and it's going to force you, it's going to take away your enjoyment of life. Quite the contrary. If you accept the Torah with its restrictions and its barriers, that will promote a more enjoyable form of life because a life of self-control allows you to enjoy life in this world. Im lav, you don't want the Torah, you want that world, you want Manhattan, you want Wall Street, you want all corporate America because people just have such great lives over there, right? That's what you want? That world will bury you. And those are the choices that Kosh Baruch Hu. That's the analogy to a barrel. Because if it was literally a mountain that's going to crush the Jewish people, that I don't need an analogy for. The depth of what's going on here is that the Torah is telling you that the irony of life, one of the great ironies of life is that the more self-control we live, the more we'll enjoy this world. When a person is out of control and has no rules, he can't, I want to say, would anybody like to play me? Do you play chess, Mike?
I do.
You do? Okay, would you like to play no rules chess with me?
No.
No? No? You don't play me no rules? Anybody want to play me no rules chess?
Heck yeah, I'll
You'll play me? Good, you just lost the first game. You want to play another game? Okay, no rules. My first rule is I won, right? That's no rules. That's the first rule. There are no rules. So the first thing I just won, no rules. You understand? A game without rules is like driving in Egypt. You ever see? I once saw a clip of driving in Egypt. Right? They don't have any. You ever see? I saw a film clip of driving in Egypt. They don't have traffic lanes. It just looks like a bunch of ants running around. Somehow they never hit each other. Maybe once in a while they do, but there are basically no laws except that if you get stopped by a cop, you pay him. That's the only law. That's the only green light is the green you take out of your pocket. That's it. Those are the only. It looks like absolute chaos. It looks like absolute chaos. That's what it looks like. Anything without rules. Let's play Monopoly without rules. Even my kids have learned. When I play Monopoly with them, I used to say with cheating or without cheating. So originally it said with cheating. Then they realized they didn't stand a chance. And I said with cheating or without, no more cheating. So now at least they don't even know that I'm cheating. They still don't stand a chance. But no rules Monopoly, you're going to lose. You're going to lose for sure. You can't play life without rules. If you play life without rules, you end up with a 75% divorce rate, and you end up with drug addictions, and you end up with teen pregnancies and everything else. That's what happens in this life without rules. When you live life with rules, with limitations, then you get into the path of decency, and that provides you with the enjoyment of life down the line. That's what the Torah is telling you. Okay, that's idea number one. Idea number two, take a look at the Ten Commandments, what they call the Aseret Hadibros. Okay, so let's just see a little bit of what the Torah says on page 406. At the bottom of page 406, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Tzisicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim V'beis Avodim. I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt from the house of slaves. So the Torah tells you, number one, that you have to believe in God, and you have to realize that God took us out of Egypt, because that is the idea of what we call hashgacha pratis. Hashgacha pratis is Hashem's personal intervention in this world, in the day-to-day running, just like He intervened in Egypt. And we have what's called hashgacha pratis in our life over here. There is direct Hashem's direct involvement in the running of the world over here. That's idea number one. I heard about a guy came to Israel, and he wanted to, a guy came to Israel and wanted to visit. This is like one of those only in Israel stories. These only happen in Israel, but the only in Israel stories also only happen in Israel for a reason. This guy comes to Israel, and he wants to visit his grandparents' grave. He has never been to Israel, and his grandparents are buried somewhere on Har Menuchos. So he wants to go to his grandparents' grave. So he's staying in their apartment. His grandparents have a flat somewhere in Beit Vegan. And he goes off to Har Menuchos the first day. If you've ever been to a cemetery and you don't know where to find the graves, it could be a very frustrating experience. He walks around for about an hour. He can't find the graves. He goes back home. Goes back 2 days. The next day he gets again. He goes to Har Menuchos, looks around, still can't find it. The third time he goes, again, he's there 45 minutes. He can't find the graves. He's very frustrated. So he gets into a cab. He says to the cab driver, the cab driver's wearing a yarmulke. He says to the cab driver, do me a favor, take me home. Where are you going? I'm going to Beit Vegan, Rehov Uziel 19. He says, which apartment? He looks at the cab driver. He says, apartment number 4, what's the difference to you? He says, oh, that's where the Goldsteins used to live. So he says, yeah, that's where the Goldsteins, that's my grandparents. I'm staying there. Yeah. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, what are you doing here? He says, well, my grandparents died about a couple of years ago, and I'm trying to find their graves on what do you call it? Only in Israel does this conversation take place, very personal. Nothing. He says, I'm trying to find their graves on Har Menuchos, as a matter of fact. So all of a sudden the cab driver turns the cab around. He says, what are you doing? He says, I know exactly where their graves are. He drives over to Har Menuchos, gets out of the cab, he says, come follow me. He takes the graves. He says, what's going on here? How do you know my grandparents? He says, how do you know your grandparents? I met your grandparents about 6 years ago. I was completely secular. And we met somewhere by shopping. Your grandparents invited me over. I went to their house. I became frum because of your grandparents. I visit their graves once a month. I know exactly where their graves are. Now that's only and it's standard in Israel. Now nobody's even impressed because it happens to everybody. Everybody has a cab driver story in Israel. So the guy, what he called, he goes. Now that's what we call hashgacha pratis. Sometimes you just sense tangibly God's divine intervention in your life, right? In Israel, again, these things in Israel are common occurrences. We almost take it for granted in Israel. I had a different friend of mine went into a bank. This is just an only in Israel story, but you get used to these also. A guy goes into a bank. There was a rabbi here in the yeshiva, Rabbi Becher. I don't know if you know him, Rabbi Mordechai Becher. So he goes into a bank. Banks close at 1 o'clock. He goes into the bank at about 5 to 1. He takes care of his transaction. And he's turning around to leave the bank. As he gets to the door, it's about 5 after 1. Every bank, there's a security guard there. So as he gets to the door, the security guard locks the door on the inside. Click. So he says, Slicha, and he wrote, so let's say it, I want to get out. So the guy looks at me and goes, he says, excuse me, you're incarcerating me against my will. That is illegal in developed countries. I want to get out of the bank. And the guy goes, he says, why won't you let me out of the bank? So he turns around, he points. There were 9 other men in the bank. They needed him for a minyan to make mincha in the bank. He got kidnapped for mincha, right? And in Israel, what happens in Israel? You just call your wife and say, sorry, they won't let me out of the bank. I'll be home a little late. You don't even try to fight it. You have mincha in the bank. That never happened to me in the First National of Chicago. Never, ever happened to you walking out of the bank. Guy says, sorry, sir, you can't leave prayer session. Never. In America, you could sue you could sue and take over the bank if they would do that to you. In Israel, it's just like, okay, if that's what we got to do. A couple of years ago, the guy said, we're burning chametz outside the yeshiva. They're burning their chametz. You know where the light rail is? You guys been on the light rail. All of a sudden the train stops. They're burning their chametz. The train stops. In the middle, the train's just running, all of a sudden the train stops. The conductor gets off the train and comes running over with a bag. He says, oh good, I was looking for a fire. I got to burn my chametz also. And he walks over and burn the chametz. And if you've been in Israel long enough, the people on the train just say, well, obviously he's got to burn his. And if anybody would dare say, it's a chutzpah, how could a guy stop doing well, you can't see, you're blind? Of course the conductor has to blind. And, so if you're living in Israel long enough, you get used to that. They once had a drought. The Kinneret's the main body of water in Israel. Now, this I could not make up if I wanted to. The Kinneret's the main body of water of Israel. We had about a 5-year drought, so the water level kept dropping. So they have what's called the red line in the Kinneret. The water level was about 10 centimeters over the red line. So they had the Minister of Agriculture on a live broadcast. And they said to him, sir, what are you going to do if the water drops down to the red line? He said, it's not a problem. We will erase the red line and draw it lower. A Minister of Agriculture, what's considered a first world country. And if you're listening, when you're living in a country, when you hear it, you just go, oh, okay. Oh, all right. You've been here so long, you just go, oh, okay. If that's what you say, fine, we'll draw a line right lower. That should take care of it. But the idea of Anochi Hashem Lokech is that there's a personal, what we call, there's a word, I forgot what's it called? The Hashgacha Pratis in English. I always forget the word, the translation for Hashgacha Pratis.
Divine providence.
Divine providence, right. Direct divine providence in our personal life. That's the first thing we have to believe. That's why I mentioned Egypt. But we have to believe that there's a God and that no alternative is possible. Now, the next one is Lo Yelecha Elohim Acher Ma'apana. You should not have any idols, idol worship, everything that goes with it. But what's really interesting here is this whole concept of belief. Now, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a philosopher. You'd have to speak to Rabbi Gottlieb and Dr. Bredowitz to get, if you have that philosophical bent on understanding God and belief and everything else. I've never been at that level. I've never been a philosopher. By me, belief is the basic understanding of it. Obviously can't be otherwise. That's good enough for me. I'm not of a philosophical bent. I never was. And everybody is entitled. Not only entitled, you should investigate it. You should investigate it to whatever your inclination takes you. You should investigate. But one explanation that I did here is that obviously people have moments of weakness in their belief, especially when you have a flat tire on a highway in your best suit and it starts raining on you. Now, then there are moments of weakness in belief. But one of the explanations I heard is like this. Imagine a doctor says to you, look, we have surgery over here. Patient has a 70% chance of surviving the surgery, 30% chance of not surviving the surgery. Okay? But he needs surgery. Would you expect that doctor to put in 70% effort or 100% effort? 100% effort. Well, yeah, 70% chance, so I'm going to put in 70% effort. I'll eat a hamburger with my other hand while I'm cutting away over there at the kidneys. I'd expect them to put in 100% effort. When it comes to belief, you're going to have days where you feel that connection to God a little stronger. And you have other days where you're just you're almost uneasy about it. What determines if you're a believer or not? What determines a believer or not is how you go about your practice. If you still put on tefillin, you're a believer. You're just a believer with a little weakness at that moment. That's something that takes a course of a lifetime to build up. The connection and the belief in God is something you can't just say, okay, I believe. Right? It doesn't work that way. If it was so simple, then we wouldn't be rewarded for it. Nothing in life is that simple. But anything that simple, it's something that has to be developed and worked on. But the way you develop the belief, the way you show your belief, is I'm putting on tefillin even if I'm not sure and why and who and exactly to what degree, but I'm putting on the tefillin. That is, my action shows that I am a true believer. So in belief, what the Torah is talking about over here as far as belief, the Torah is talking about that we have to work on developing our belief. And the way you work on developing your belief is belief doesn't come without the action. It works the other way around. By doing the action, you actually develop the belief. And once you develop the belief, then you don't have any questions. But it has to go through the action. It doesn't work the other way. Hold the question for a little while. It doesn't work the other way. So, for example, if a guy says, I'll daven when I feel inspired to daven, why should I just go to shul and say words? The answer is, because if you don't go to shul and say words, you're never going to feel inspired to daven. Nobody's over here. If you're sitting in front of a TV with a can of beer and a bag of peanuts, nobody's going to say, gee, I feel inspired to daven. That's not going to happen. The only time you will be inspired to daven is when there are unfortunate circumstances. You don't want to wait till that. And therefore, a person who is looking to build their belief, the belief comes through going through the davening. That's why there's a halacha when you daven that you have to actually say the words loud enough for yourself to hear them, because it creates them. Why can't we just daven in our heart? The answer is if you daven in your heart, you're going to space out. And if you say the words, then you have a chance of actually not spacing out. And therefore, a person has to actively participate in order to develop the belief. That's what brings about the belief, okay? That's as far as belief goes. And again, whatever your level of inclination and intellectual ability is, you should pursue it according to where your heart is inclined. When I met my wife, we had gone out about 4 times, 5 times. Shidduchim, you go on a shidduch. Standard is after about 6, 7 times, you start making a decision. I already knew after the 2nd time that I was going to propose, but we went out, and having a good time. And then I came back to the yeshiva, and I heard a bunch of guys talking about shidduchim. Also, one of the guys said, we were talking about it, and you're going, yeah, they like her, I'm going to marry her. The guy says, did you talk about anything deep? I'm thinking, deep? Do we talk about anything deep? We talked about the Chafetz Chaim. I guess that's pretty deep. I don't know. I get that. We talk about the Chafetz Chaim. She did a report on the Chafetz Chaim. I thought that was pretty deep. You talk about it, I started getting nervous. Like I decided, okay, next time, deep, Kaplan. It's got to be deep. You got to talk about something deep. So I think, okay, well, what am I going to talk about? I got, the belief, this, that's okay. So I sat down. I said to her something like, I waited after the preliminaries. I said something like, what do you think about Hashem? I figured that's pretty deep, right? I figured is that deep? Is that where you're talking? I said, well, what do you think about Hashem? She goes, oh, I definitely believe. I said, yeah, me too. Let's get some pizza. I think we spent the rest of the night talking about Elton John. That was as deep as it got. So yeah, it depends. So a guy, you have some people like, do I really exist, or am I a figment of somebody's imagination? Some people are bothered by that problem. I've never been bothered by that. All you do is reach for his wallet and you'll see he exists. Right? He exists. If that's the word, kick him in the shins, and then you know he exists. I was never bothered by that, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be, and it doesn't mean it's wrong. If a person has that bent, you should investigate it down to that level. That's up to you. I'm just telling you, that's what the Torah's command is over here, and that's up to each individual how far they want to investigate. I'm not bothered by it. I was never bothered by it because I knew that whatever this question of free choice versus predetermination, how could God know in advance what I'm going to choose? It never bothered me because somehow I still had to get up at 6:30 in the morning and put on my tefillin. So regardless of whether God knew I was going to or not, I still had to do it. So I wasn't bothered by it. If somebody could have told me, look, until you get this resolved, you don't have to get out of bed. All right, that's got some practical application to it. But in the absence of practical application, I just, I'll deal with other things, like how do I pay my electric bill. All right? So that's as far as belief in God. Now, the Torah then talks about honoring parents, and the Torah talks about, the other various fun things that we're not allowed to do. So let's analyze it. Let's take a look at that a little bit on page 410. Torah says, Kabed es avicha ve'esimecha. Honor your father and your mother. 3 lines on the bottom. L'mayin ya'arichun yamecha, in order that your days should be extended. Al ha'adama asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lach. That your days should be extended on the earth which Hashem your God gives you. Now, first of all, you'll notice that the Torah writes over here, honor your father and your mother. Later on in the Torah, in Parshas Kedoshim, it says, Ish imo ve'aviv tiro. Every man must fear his mother and his father. Here, the Torah says, honor your father and your mother. And the Talmud, the Gemara in Kedushin says, well, it's interesting that the two are reversed, because here the father precedes the mother, and yet when it talks about fear, it says you must fear your mother and your father. It reverses them. Okay? So the Talmud points out, obviously, an obvious conflict here in the way it's the structure, the way it's written in the text of the Chumash. So the Talmud says, well, there are 2 inclinations that a person has. When it comes to honor, who do you honor more in your heart of hearts, your father or your mother? Right? So most guys will say, well, my dad, there's that guy thing, I drink beer with my dad, and that. But in your heart of hearts, you really honor your mother more. It's almost like the proof is that it's almost apple pie, Chevrolet, and mom. is all American, right? And even the football players, when they zoom in on a football player sitting on a bench, who does he always wave to? Hi, Mom. So he's, hi, Mom. Is ever Dad? Mom doesn't even know the rules of football yet. You know, and he's still, hi, Mom. Dad's in a bar with his buddy. That's my son, the gorilla. That's my boy, the gorilla. You know, and your mom probably is oh yeah, I hope he didn't get hurt. You know that. Yeah, but it's always hi. There's certain loyalty to Mom. There's certain loyalty. I would call what he calls honor. In our terms, I would talk. It means honor, but I would talk about in terms of there's a certain loyalty. Mom occupies a place where no one else occupies. You know, insult my wife, insult my girlfriend, don't insult my mother, right? Even when you've had cut-up fights with your friends, right? You know, certain things are off, moms are off limits. You know, there's a certain line that you draw. Mom occupies a certain place in our heart. And therefore the Torah says, in other words, you're more likely to honor your mother. Therefore, the Torah has to emphasize, honor your father first. Because the one you're more likely to honor is your mother. Therefore, the Torah says, put the emphasis on the father. When it comes to fear, who do you fear more? Fear more the father. It's very rare to hear a father say to his kids that are running around the house. It's very rare to have a father say, you just wait till your mother gets home, right? That's very rare. The mother is always the one to say, you just wait till your father gets home. And sometimes she's disappointed because the father had a good day at work. And if his investments are up, he comes home and the mother says, you know, you're not going to believe what happened. Shimmy was running around and he glued Ilana to the wall. You know, father was, oh, that's my boy. You know, and it's not quite the reaction the mother wants because the father's in. So if the father's in a bad mood, had a hard day, you know, everybody gets botched. You know, that's great. He just, you know, whoop, weighing on the hand, and everybody, oh, Dad's coming. All of a sudden to hear Dad's footsteps on the stairs. This one's brushing his teeth. He's doing homework. She's in bed. You know, everything is straightened out in a second. Because Dad, we're obviously afraid of our father more than the mother, and therefore the Torah has to emphasize mother first. When it comes to fear your mother and your father. The one that you're less likely, that's what the Torah puts first. So when it comes to honor, you see, the idea is like this. The Gemara says, why do you honor your mother more than your father? So the Torah, the way the Talmud puts it is, mipnei shemishadloso bidvarim. Your mother soothes you with words. Your mother is more soothing. So for example, if you come home and you got a 47 on your test. And your father's like, all right, like good for nothing, he's never going to amount to anything. And your mother says, yeah, but you know, there are good for nothings who do amount to something. You know, so your mother's a little more upbeat about it. She gives you some chicken soup and everything will be okay. Don't worry about it. Therefore, we have a special place in our heart for Mom. It's also kind of, you know, there isn't a Jewish mother alive who would take the last piece of pie if you're sitting at the table, or son's sitting at the table. If there's one last piece of pie, there isn't a Jewish mother, she would hurl herself out a window before she'd take the last piece of pie. Your father, you know, you could be sitting with your father at the table, and your father's reading the newspaper, you know, just kind of looks over, oh, pretty good, you know. He'll just take that, and you're just thinking, like, Dad, that was on my plate, you know. And, oh, who are you? you know, and your father is like, whoa, you know, everything is. So the mother, there's more of that loyalty, to Mom. So the Torah says you have to honor your father and your mother. Now, the Torah then says, and promises the reward is longevity. Long life. Okay, whatever long life is, long life relative to what a person would have lived. Why do you think the Torah specifically here promises that reward? Why specifically here? Forget what the reward is exactly. Just take it as longer life, for however long life is manifest. Why does the Torah promise that here?
Longer life for honoring your parents?
Yeah. Why do you think the Torah promises it here?
I would say because your mom's going to feed you nice and more chicken soup if you're nice to her.
And that makes you grow big and strong. I see. Okay. They're the ones that give you life is why you have to do it. We'll talk about that in a second. They're the ones who give you life, which is why you have the obligation. And we'll understand that in a second, what is underlying the command. But why is this the reward? Why do you think specific? Right off the bat, honor your parents that you should live long. Why?
So your children have the same reward.
That's certainly how they're going to learn to honor you, is by seeing what you do. That's for sure. The Eskimo practice of when people get older, the whole family abandons them and leaves them behind is certainly frowned upon in Judaism. But why is it that the Torah promises long life specific? Why does it say, honor your parents, you'll be rich? Honor your parents so you can get rich. Why is that honor your parents so you should live long? Why is that the reward? The answer is that of all things, you see, parents, especially when, there are different stages in life. There's when you're a teenager and you're supposed to honor your parents, and, the best thing you can do is stay out of prison. Well, I honored my parents. I didn't get arrested tonight, this Saturday night. Okay, that's good. When you're a teenager, that's good. As the parents get a little older, parents take up a little more time. And the reason we find it so difficult, the Gemara says this is the most difficult mitzvah, is because it can be very time-consuming to honor parents. I got to take up my time. Your father may be older. You got to walk to shul with him. And a 5-minute walk now takes 20 minutes. It's very time-consuming. You got to spend time driving them to doctor. It's very time-consuming. And therefore, the impediment may be that a person thinks to himself, I'm going to lose time in my life because I'm taking care of the parents. The first thing Torah wants to teach is it's not going to come off don't worry, you're not going to pay in time. You take care of them, you'll live longer. Don't worry, it's not going to come off of your time expectancy. Don't worry, it's not going to, you're not going to lose out anything. And the answer to your question is not what your question, what you said is that's very true. The only way to instill that belief, Rabbi Weinbach Zatzal, Rosh Hashiva, he once said, there's a story about a guy who had an elderly father. The elderly father was living at the house. He was really old, probably very old, Rabbi Mandel's age even. And he was living in the house, and the elderly father, he was ancient, and he was what do you call it? His hands were shaking. Kind of like Chicago Bears quarterbacks. His hands were shaking, and he couldn't. Every time he got something in his hands, he dropped it, and he would sit at the table, and he kept knocking over plates. And every couple of days, another plate crashed on the floor and broke. The son was getting upset. He says, Dad, listen, you're going to have to stop knocking stuff off the table. And if you don't, I'm going to make a wooden plate, and then you can knock it off as much as you want. It's never going to break. He said, oh, please don't make me a wooden plate. I'll be very embarrassed if I got to sit at the table with the wooden plates. And stop knocking off plates off the table. Okay. So one day he knocks off another plate, and the son's had it. He says, that's it, Dad, that's it. He goes down to the workshop in the basement, takes out the electric saw, and he takes a piece of wood, he starts making this plate. So 17-year-old son comes down, he pulls out an electric saw and starts carving also. He says, you don't have to carve one, Scott. One is enough for Grandpa. All he needs is one plate, one bread. He says, oh, I'm not making it for Grandpa. I'm making it for you when you're older. And that's what the kids learn. Is the way you treat your parents is the way the kids are going to treat you. So if the kids see that you are devoted to your parents, so the kids will be devoted to you. They see that you take your parents and you shove them in a home, and you let some foreigner take care of them. That's what they'll do to you, right? So you may as well hire a foreigner now, right? So at least you could choose that, right? Choose one, put it on hold, right? Because that's what the children see, the way you choose. So that's as far as the reward for the mitzvah goes. Now, you mentioned the idea of your parents gave you life. Okay, so let's just start this. We're out of time, but the idea that what's behind this mitzvah? What is behind the mitzvah? Why is it the Torah puts a premium? What's really underlying this mitzvah? That we'll speak about tomorrow. Yeah, Binyamin, what's up?
So I was wondering if you also had to honor, say, like your in-laws.
We'll talk about that.